the former congressman from Texas. He made White House bids twice as a Republican and once as the Libertarian Party's president. He is the founder of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and he is an outspoken advocate for limited government, personal liberty, and low taxes. And you can catch him online as host of Ron Paul Liberty Report. And right now, Dr. Paul joins me from Lake Jackson, Texas. Thanks for being here, Ron.
Thank you, Laura. Nice to be with you.
Well, before we get into some specific issues, I would love to ask you, if you were to grade this president so far, what kind of grade would you give President Trump?
Oh, I'm staying out of politics. I'm not going to get involved in controversies. I would say that half of his rhetoric is very good. Half of his rhetoric in the campaign would always give me a little hope. I'm disappointed that, there's a little bit of flip-flopping, but when I look at the foreign policy and overall spending policy, I would say the grade is not all that good. I still am hopeful that things will work out better, but I can't get higher than a C- for the outcome so far, because I think the militarism is continuing and spending is continuing, and we're not likely to get rid of the Federal Reserve financing of the welfare state. So I can't give them too high of a vote on what's going on so far.
And looking ahead, would you say you're more optimistic about what may come in the months and years ahead if he's given that time?
No, I'm very pessimistic what's coming, but I don't think I'd put all the blame on Trump. I blame the system. I think that the country is facing so much trouble that one person or even one Congress can't reverse it. We're seeing the end stages of runaway Keynesian economics. It's sort of like, what can you do? What could Gorbachev have done to save the Soviet system? Well, it was over. Communism failed, and no matter what he did, the tanks couldn't save a failed idea. And we have been working on a failed idea for 100 years, military interventionism, economic interventionism, gradual disintegration of our civil liberties. So it's not going to be easy. We do need a revolution, but I don't think the revolution that has been offered either by the current administration or the so-called socialist revolution of Bernie Sanders, that's not going to answer the problems that we have. I'm looking for something more fundamental and maybe restating and improving on and working to improve what the founders had intended, with an emphasis on personal liberty and free markets. I don't see that in the near term. On the long term, though, believe it or not, I'm an optimist, because I think there's a lot of young people very interested in libertarian views and pro-peace and sound money and anti-Fed. That's where I get my encouragement. I speak out to the Young Americans for Liberty quite frequently. We get good crowds and a lot of enthusiasm. But this is for politics' sake, and what's going to happen in the next 6 months or a year or even several years is not going to be easy. I think symbolic of this is how they took care of Obamacare. I mean, total chaos. And I think they'll probably run into that too. There's too many special interests, and the system doesn't function. Our productivity is down. The debt is out of control. So the tax issue will be no easier solved than has been the Obamacare. So they're up against great odds. And right now, I don't see the answers coming in the short term from this administration.
Well, it's interesting, Ron, you bring up Obamacare, and just this last Sunday morning, a few days ago, Trump tweeted, "Talks on repealing and replacing Obamacare are and have been going on and will continue until such a time as a deal is hopefully struck." What are your thoughts on that, especially given that your son, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, golfed with the president and he seemed a bit optimistic afterwards?
Well, I think what Trump is saying, that it's ongoing, the transition, but I think it's what he's witnessing, what we're all witnessing, is the disintegration of a bad idea. In truth, from a medical viewpoint as well as a political viewpoint, Obamacare really didn't serve the interests of medicine or patients or anything else. It certainly was very destructive to freedom of choice and cost. We don't have competition in medicine, and that's why cost always goes up. So no, he's looking for a hopeful sign because we're ending Obamacare, but it's almost ending itself. But putting it together is more difficult because when you look at the Freedom Caucus, of which Rand was part of, they were saying, hey, this isn't it. We have to have something better. What comes out with the conversation with Rand and the president is I don't know about that, but I do know that the current system can't work, and they can make it worse by having all government or never giving us freedom of choice. We need a lot more competition in medicine, and we could do some transitional things by just allowing some of us to get out of it and deduct it from our taxes. And even if you had a program that took care of the people that we have created that don't have medical care and they're out on the street, not as a victim of free markets, but as a victim of government medicine. If you even took care of them and paid for it by bringing some of our troops home, you could work our way out of this.
Do you think there might be some of these fixes that you're talking about as far as putting more competition into the marketplace that could be bipartisan, just small fixes along the way without a full replace of Obamacare?
I keep hoping that is the case, but I don't think it can be bipartisan because I think there's so much hatred between the two. I think they should take it. I saw one proposal, just repeal it. And it won't go into effect until the end of the year. And so you have up until the end of the year to do the good things, you know, maybe tax deductions and maybe a medical savings account and getting rid of the bureaucracy, freeing up the medical drug industry. They have monopoly control of drugs. And you could do a whole lot, making it legal to sell insurance more freely across borders, making sure that individuals can get the same tax benefit that you can if you're working with working in a company. Yeah, you could do that and just have up and down votes for about 10 issues. And you could do that systematically for the rest of the year. But first you have to say, it's done. Obamacare is over, so this is what you better do. You better have an alternative. Then I think, hopefully Republicans and the administration could put it together. And once it is seen as positive, maybe some Democrats could come over and join us in an effort to, provide for medical care in a much freer market system than what we have today. But unfortunately, there's been this clinging to this notion that government is necessary. And of course, the fundamental problem here, and something I've talked about on my program, is medical care a right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, well, if it isn't a right, you must be an evil person. But quite frankly, it isn't a right. You don't have a right to other people's stuff. And if that is the case, you have to violate their rights. So if you have a right to free medical care, you have to violate somebody else's right. So that's a misnomer. I think protecting rights are important, but I think it's much more important if by doing that, you're going to introduce the old-fashioned notion of real competition and no big corporations getting special benefits, which is ongoing now almost all throughout our economy, mm-hmm. certainly in the military industrial industry, and we need to get rid of that, this corporatism in medicine as well.
Well, it's very interesting. You mentioned a bipartisan approach or the lack of a bipartisan approach. You yourself spent over 20 years in Congress, looking at the Congress now and the divide and even the possible hatred between parties. Where do you see the Democrats and Republicans coming together on the issues that face us?
Well, that was something, even though the conditions were not that good when I was there. I think there are more freedom lovers in the Congress now, in the Freedom Caucus and elsewhere. But I still work very hard on this because I think that is important. But there's two different things. If you're a moderate trying to bring people together, a good conservative has to give up some of his conservative viewpoints, and a good liberal gives up some of their viewpoints. But I would work with a person like Dennis Kucinich. And he's a progressive, an honest person, a decent person to work with. So what did we agree on? We didn't agree on medical care, but we agreed on civil liberties, less government. We agreed on some of the international trade organization. We agreed on foreign policy, saving money there. And that's a coalition of people. Neither Dennis nor I sacrifice anything that we believe in. And I think working in that attitude, you should be able to get more people to come together. And if there is a strong disagreement on medical care, work it out some other way. But in the meantime, when you can get another group to agree with you, but right now, you know, there's so much, you know, disagreement in Congress. Nobody wants to give in. It's so much partisanship. It's a power struggle. Because, you know, what bothers me the most is, you know, they have all that fighting and they want bipartisanship. And I always thought there was way too much bipartisanship. They agreed on spending, they agreed on welfare, they agreed on militarism, they agreed on the Fed, and they agreed that deficits were okay because both Republicans and Democrats ran it up. Just look now, deficit's going to skyrocket in this administration. So I don't like that type of bipartisanship. But you can have coalition building, and that's what we should work for.
Well, you make me a lot more optimistic about coalition building after talking with you, Ron. Now, there's this controversy right now over alleged ties between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Do you feel a bipartisan congressional panel can effectively investigate this, or should there be an independent panel put together?
I have very, very little confidence of any investigation by government. You know, commissions, they've been around for a long time. And I was asked during the campaign because the people didn't feel like we were getting the full truth on 9/11. And certainly the Congress has expressed their disdain with the Saudis over that. So they said, would you have another investigation? I said, yes, we should investigate. We should try to get to the bottom of this and know the truth about it. But I wouldn't have a government investigation because that just covers up things. When you know, about 80-some% don't agree with the Kennedy Commission to find out who killed Kennedy and what the circumstances were. They disagree with it. So that has traditionally been the case. And even the 9/11 Commission now has been discredited because, you know, they never brought up the Saudis at the time. And why on the very day I was trying to get back to Texas, I heard there were 10 or 15 Saudi airplanes flying out a bunch of Saudis, and their last name was bin Laden. And that kind of stuff was not fully exposed, you know, in the commission. So another commission, I don't know, it probably depends on it, but the odds of them really sorting out the truth, it would be, if you bring two people together, you know, a true commission should be done within the Congress, not to go out and try to find outside sources, because then when you get the outside individuals, then who gets to pick the outside individuals, you know, and it becomes, you know, just not the answer. But I guess I wouldn't be totally closed-minded, but I would not be a great optimist. Say, oh boy, that's what we need, just one more commission, and we're going to find the truth. We'll call up the FBI and the CIA. They'll testify as to what the truth is. NSA will tell us what's the truth. They know everything that's anybody ever said, and they have a record of everybody, so that's where we can find the truth. I'd rather go to Julian Assange and Edward Snowden to find the truth, not to another commission.
We've got more with former Congressman Ron Paul right after this. Welcome back to Politicking. My guest is Ron Paul, the former representative of Texas. He made 3 White House bids, and he is the founder of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Ron, we're thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Now, before we left off, you were discussing the NSA and the FBI and Snowden and leaks and so forth. What are your thoughts on Trump's repeated and apparently totally baseless at this point allegations that Obama wiretapped his phones at Trump Tower during the campaign. What do you think about the tweet on that?
Well, I think it's a safe bet that was the case because I think everybody gets wired. I think wiring is the misleading term because wiring a phone used to be old-fashioned wiring a phone. It's sort of like we print a lot of money, but we just create credit in a computer. So no, what they know, the government knows everything, and they have records. Everybody gets monitored. So yes, I think they did, and I think most likely now with the current information, it may well have been directed by Obama and his staff and Rice and these people who wanted to know who the Trump people were talking to. So yes, I think it happens all the time. I think that it's bipartisan, but right now it looks like there was a grand plan by the opponents of Trump to figure out a lot more and then blame him. And of course, Assange and others claim that they have so much computer technology now that if they wired Trump, they can, if there was some wiring done on Obama, they can make it look like the Russians did it and drag the Russians in. Now it's everybody blames the Russians for it. So it is a big mess, but in many ways it's a distraction. That has distracted from warmongering, it's distracted from the Federal Reserve, it's distracted from the horrendous problems we have in spending and the crisis that we face economically and the crisis of our civil liberties and all this mess. Why aren't they more concerned about the spying on the average American, you know, and rather than all this bickering back and forth about the political spying that has gone on. So it to me is a lot of time it's a distraction from some of the more important issues.
Well, and a very important issue that you just brought up was that spending. Now, we saw the budget unveiled, and whereas Donald Trump is taking back spending at the State Department, we are exhilarating the spending in the military. Now, you yourself, an incredible veteran of the U.S. Air Force, what are your thoughts on escalating the military spending over that of diplomacy?
Well, I'm really glad that you used the right word, military spending. There's a big difference between military spending and defense spending. I want a lot more concern about defense and defense spending. I don't like militarism for the sake of people making profits or having offensive weapons. Today I just read a report that showed that one of our major generals came out and said, you know what we need are more nuclear weapons. 13,000 is not enough. And we need more than $500 billion to spend on it, which is planned to keep upgrading our nuclear weapons, and that was started by Obama. But he said it will take probably $1 trillion, but then what we really need is a program that will last for 30 years, and we need many, many trillions of dollars just dealing with nuclear weapons. And he says the one thing that you should never do is have anybody make bids on how much it might cost. That's a total distraction. And he's convinced himself that the best argument for more nuclear weapons is, you know, the more nukes you have, the less likely you are to fight a war. And then if you fight a war, that would cost more than the nuclear weapons. Well, I don't quite buy into that. I think we have enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world about 20 times. And this is, to have enough weapons for defense doesn't require trillions and trillions of dollars eternally. And this to me is nothing more than a gimmick for somebody making a lot of money off military spending. And it's ongoing. It's just not nuclear weapons. It's everything else. All the weapons we use and blow up in the Middle East and give to Saudi or sell to Saudi Arabia and the various countries. I mean, it's absolutely out of control. And for anybody who says they're conservative or libertarian who votes for this type of spending can't be conservative, and they're participating to the deficit. And then you add that on, well, our bridges are all falling down. Of course, I only remember one major bridge having trouble. But the bridges are all falling down. We have to spend trillions of dollars there, and certainly we can't take anybody everybody off food stamps. What we need to do is continue this economic policy where the number of people who need food stamps will probably go up. So they don't challenge the principles of welfareism or militarism and interventionism overseas. They just say that, you know, we need the spending is important and deficits don't matter, which is a Keynesian idea. They don't really believe deficits matter. And of course, supply-siders joined into that. They kept saying, no, we'll just lower the taxes and we'll work hard and we'll produce more revenues and the budget will be balanced. Well, eventually it comes to a conclusion where deficits do matter. And that's one of the reasons why there's a stalemate in Washington and why they haven't been able to get anything done, because as far as real value goes, there is no real value because our productivity is down, and Trump's absolutely right. The jobs are overseas because our conditions here, you shouldn't have to badger people to come here, but you should have conditions that are right, and he's right when he says less regulation and less taxes, but there's too much badgering going on and too much threatening going on, which doesn't really help us in the economy. It helps to spend more money is the unfortunate thing.
Well, and many of those issues you just kind of summed up really all goes towards the federal bureaucracy that's all around us. I want to get your take on this, Ron. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is going to head the new White House Office of American Innovation. Its purpose is to harvest ideas from the business world to transform federal bureaucracy, potentially revitalize some of the government functions. What do you think of that approach going into the business world?
Well, the fact that a member of the family comes in, and it's been traditional, that goes back hundreds of years in the early history, members, wives and daughters, you know, participated in it. So that in itself, you know, isn't the issue. And of course, if it's too close of a relative, you know, the laws prevent that from coming. But to go in and be a volunteer and participate, the big deal for me would be, what are his views? If he's there to prop up Saudi Arabia and bombing Yemen and all this other stuff, you know, that's a big deal. But if he had 20 cousins and they were all hardcore libertarians, I'd say get them in there and get the advice out of there. It's what they believe in that counts. And but if they get in there and they're just arguing over power, who gets to spend the money and who gets the special deals, and you know, in corporatism, there's a lot of contests going on, but not with the principal, but who gets the loot and who gets the contracts, and that is what's going on.
Yeah, do you think ideas from the business world can really help buoy up American innovation and the bureaucracy that's there, or maybe contribute more bureaucracy to it?
Not if he uses the same approach. It's not a business. It won't work. It'll be a total failure. But you could have a good businessman that happens to understand free markets and limited government and how the central bank messes up things. And if he's incidentally a businessman that did a very good job, I think that doesn't mean that he couldn't be. But if he thinks they're going to move in and apply business practices to running a department, forget it. I can remember, I think I was in high school when I first heard these stories. You know what? The post office is always losing money, it's ineffective, and we need to clean that up. And I remember there was an appointment made. He's a businessman, and he knows how to run it. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is going to help save money, and there can be a profit in the post office. It didn't matter. The people who make profits in delivering packages, FedEx and UPS, that's the business market you need outside of government. But you cannot pick up and treat bureaucrats the same way, because it's all special interests and privileges, and you have unions to deal with. So that is not going to work. Just because you know how to run a business does not qualify you to run a government. Matter of fact, it's a detriment if you think you can run a bureaucracy like you run a business, and that may be where some of the trouble is coming from, because when you're a businessman, you are the boss in a government where you have relative freedom like we have. We're not supposed to answer to a boss that tells every little things and runs everything. It doesn't work that way.
Do you think that President Trump and his administration kind of gets the difference between running a business, campaigning, and now governing?
I doubt it, but I guess time will tell.
Time will tell.
No, I think he thinks that his skills, you know, in negotiating, but sometimes he is telling the truth, and we know exactly what he's doing. But this whole idea about deal making, Well, you know, it goes back to my statement about Dennis Kucinich. We don't make deals that we give this and that, but he wants to. If you make a deal, it's back to what the Tea Party people were complaining about. All these deals being made. So it'll be interesting to see how this comes out on Obamacare. I think this is a real interesting story, because will we see the total end of Obamacare and the total introduction of market forces? No, right now it doesn't look all that great.
There's always something to explore a bit more with you, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Politicking. And thank you to Larry King for allowing me to sit in his chair today. Remember, we love hearing from you. Join the conversation on Larry's Facebook page. And as always, you can share your thoughts on Twitter by tweeting @KingsThings and using the hashtag Politicking. I also invite you to join me on Twitter @Laura Schwartz. So that's all for this edition of Politicking, and thank you for coming back.